our focus is social VR.
Social VR is basically saying that something is digital, online, connected, and shared. And that the expectations that we have of things being connected to the internet, of information being accessible, and of other people being accessible is something that people are going to expect from these devices. All of these devices can connect online all the time. Anyone who creates something that is offline is effectively doing something that is 10 years backwards. Um, Now, the first time out, you may have to because it's harder. But the reality is that the expectation from our consumers, whether you are making something on the PC side, for a console, for the premium mobile, those are the Samsung Gear VR. So really quickly, Valve HTC Vive, Oculus Facebook Rift, Sony PlayStation VR, Samsung Gear VR, Google Daydream, and the Google Cardboard. Now keep in mind that there are more things coming out in every category. These are all growing. At some point, there's going to be a hardware bloodbath. But the reality is that these are all growing, and this is the biggest in terms of units, but this is also the simplest to develop for. There are about 100 different headsets between US and Chinese and also some European manufacture for these. But the cardboard spec has been fantastic in getting something out there, but it's also massively limiting. You have something that's very cheap, has almost zero input. You can put something on, and it's basically an old-style viewfinder. It's wonderful to be able to look around, but as soon as people start to do that, they want to start to touch the world that they're seeing. So I want to kind of give you guys some numbers so that you're thinking about this and understanding why you should care about some of this. This is effectively the first year that this stuff is really commercially out there. I'll just start with the big ones. So there are 100 different scattered manufacturers. They're all different. It's all completely disorganized. No one really knows how many of these are actually being used, how many have been tossed, how many are sitting in a drawer somewhere. But there are theoretically 84 million of these in the wild. This just launched. There were the only phone that it was really compatible with prior to CES this year was the Google Pixel, and there are about 275,000 of these in the wild in the first couple months. Now that's going to grow because Google is positioning this as Android VR. Now they're going to get some competition from Samsung here. Samsung has 5 million of these now after. Depending on how you count it, effectively, commercially, 15 months or so. So Samsung has made some really fast strides in terms of solidifying, and there's going to be some sort of question of what happens between essentially the largest hardware Android manufacturer and the creator of Android. And they've got to figure out what they're going to do and if they're going to compete indefinitely. Sony PlayStation VR. Lots of folks overestimated these because they weren't aware of the complexity of some of the parts. These sold 750,000 units in basically about 2 to 3 weeks, and then they sold out. They could have easily sold twice that many. This came out basically late October and sold out almost immediately. And that's partially because it connects into a PS4, and there are currently 50 million PS4s out there. There will be other things in this category. And there are certain parties that actively compete with Sony in the console space that will compete with Sony in the console space. Sony will not be the only one in that space. And it's going to be interesting to see some of that competition because there's a history here of taking things mainstream. And there's an awareness of how to manufacture at volume that two particular partners in this space know and understand very well that other people have been struggling with. Speaking of people who have been struggling with manufacturing, the PC VR space. So our demo out there was in the PC VR space. That demo, we were showing it on a on an HTC Vive, which is made between Valve and HTC. We do also have it running. In fact, I'll show you multiplayer a little later on that's running between these two. Um, so currently, this is outselling this, which is actually confounding everyone. That people thought it would be the other way around. I think that there's going to be a good neck-and-neck horse race here. In terms of quick units, about 350,000 in the first 9 months of sales, about 500,000 units in the first 8 months of sales, plus about another 100 to 150,000 units in China. So this is leading this. At one point, it was leading it by 3 to 1. Now it's closer to 2 to 1, maybe a little bit less. But yeah, this is kind of the spectrum of when people are talking VR. This is what they're developing on. The benefits. These 3 devices here have the clearest path to premium monetization. People are buying these, they're paying more, and they want to be able to try something out. So what you have to keep in mind in this range here is that people are happily putting down $20, $40, $60 for products in this space with the notion that that product is interactive. People have not found a good way yet of monetizing passive content, but active content, interactive content they have. So premium monetization here, these are steadily getting user acquisition. And what that means is that there's less input, there's less interactivity, but you can still do interactivity with these. It's possible, but a lot harder with this. But obviously the install bases are growing quickly on this. There's an assumption that as phones can actually run these, that this will grow, and that this is going to grow, and that this is going to keep growing as it is. So people are using these to give people their first experience, to put something on and just kind of look around. And honestly, like for that 360 video, and just something that you can look around is the best way to get someone in at first, because it gives them something that they're familiar with. That right from the beginning, they look around and they're like, oh, I can see that it's different, and they're not worried about interacting yet. Once people get a little bit beyond that, they start wanting to do more. They start wanting to interact and change things. But there is that balance where we're still trying to figure out the market. We're still trying to figure out who's going to win. There's an assumption that there's probably literally twice as many headsets, if not more, coming out, and what the standards are, and at some point all of these are going to merge, which is something else to keep in mind, which is probably not in this hardware generation, maybe not even in the next one, but somewhere down the road, these are all going to merge into all-in-one devices. And at that point, it'll be Sony directly competing with Facebook, competing with Google, et cetera. So there's, so right now you're often thinking like you need to start with one of these in terms of an experience that you're creating or an experience you're trying to get out to people, but you're still kind of thinking, can I shift back and forth here? Because the reality is that the market overall still is small enough that you want to be able to move between these if you can. So yeah, I wanted to kind of ground you guys in terms of this is some of what VR is, and in terms of why you should care. What I would go back to is that that VR and really this whole XR range is effectively going to become the next computing platform, and it's not going to happen next year, but it might take 5 years, and it might take 10, and it might take 15. No one knows exactly how long, but every major large computing company in hardware, software is betting on this and working on this. Every single company. And it's because they know that at some point, smartphones are going to become smart glasses, and that people are going to walk down the street and they're going to talk to their glasses, or they're going to do gestures in front of their glasses. And that there's going to be this balance between, okay, I want to go home and I want to watch a movie. Now I want to go jump into a game. Now I want to wander around and have someone give me specific instructions on fixing things, and stuff appears in front of me. So that's all going to blend together. But I wanted to come back to this because in VR, with this notion of social VR that is going to be digital, online, connected, and shared, if you don't start with the notion that you need an active internet component in some capacity. It can be synchronous, it can be asynchronous, but build for the notion that your stuff is connected in together, that people can interact and they can draw information into it. That's somewhere to start. The next wave, and this is what we're building, is the notion that, I like sort of grouping these things together, that what we're making for the second generation of social VR is immersive, emergent, and interactive. It's visceral, it's physical, it's tactile, it's systemic, it's cooperative, it's replayable. That because those sorts of properties are what the next wave of social VR needs. And to a certain extent, you can say even going on to Facebook has some of these right now. That people expect to be connected in. They expect to be able to touch each other either intellectually or physically and go like, hey, you're over there, or beyond the fact that they like to then proceed to throw things at each other, physically and verbally. Just to kind of get wrapped up here, what I want to focus on and just have you guys thinking about is that one of the most important lessons that you can have when you're thinking about VR is that VR at its heart is going to be, and if it's done right, it feels real. It takes a while, but it's about trying to create enough cues around you. It's the audio, it's the visuals, it's the controls, it's the physics, but it's that you are in a real place and you've been transported. And when and the lessons for that, you can take lessons from lots of things. You should take influences and inspiration from lots of things, but probably the strongest lesson that I can give you for that is draw from theater, not from film. Because VR, when people try to draw from film, they keep going back to, I need to have a frame. And this is all about going outside of the frame. And that's the case whether it's in 360 video or that's in a fully immersive 3D VR environment. But the assumption is you can start to change things. And as soon as you start to change things, you have to build for the notion that you can draw the player's attention if you're lucky, but you have to know that you have to know it and they have to know it, and effectively it's a conversation between you and the audience, between the thing that you're creating and the folks who are watching, because effectively the audience is coming up on stage. So please keep that in mind when you're designing for VR. When you're thinking about VR, just remember it's an emerging market. It's something that is constantly changing. The other thing I would say about our approach is that there are a lot of important lessons in putting content and tech together. And specifically, no matter how light you're doing on one or the other, learn to iterate between the two. Learn to, maybe you want to go off and make tools. Get some content in there. Get something that can test out the tools and have people trying it out. If you're focused on making content and let's say you're putting animation into VR, that you need to constantly be thinking, oh, can either I find someone who makes tools or who licenses middleware who can make this process better, or can my team do that as well? But anytime that you're going into a new medium, into a new platform, that shifting between content and tech becomes really necessary, because anyone who gets stuck doing just one or just the other generally misses the boat on something big.